up here, but after we'll hear from Dr. Close. Dave Close is the John H. McConnell Chaired Professor of Business Administration, Chairperson of the Department of Supply Chain Management at MSU. No, wait a minute. Not one of the top Department of Supply Chain Management schools in the country, but the #1 Department of Supply Chain Management at Michigan State University. I've said this about so many of our presenters today. These people work tirelessly to make things work and to really talk with one another and try and get people together and resolve some of these problems. But I really think Dave gets the prize. He is working across all borders as far as audiences go. He is in the policy conversation. He's working in the business arena. Yet he is his #1 commitment, and I can't break this as much as I'd like to drag him off to some of these different audiences. He is committed to students and really helping, guiding, teaching the young people who will be our leaders of tomorrow, as they say, but people who will graduate someday and need jobs. And he has, your school has 90, what's the placement? Like 99% placement of their graduates. So you're doing something right. We appreciate your being here today and your leadership in the supply chain world. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much, Anne Marie. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I decided to go a little bit different direction today. As some of you have seen me present before, and I could have, not nearly as well, but talked about some of the issues that Roy talked about, or that Dan Lynch talked about, or the mayor talked about. So I'm going to say another direction and say, what's supply chain? Because we've heard it mentioned a lot today, but I want to talk about some of the things that are happening in the supply chain today, because it's really evolving. Last week we had at MSU, as Anne Marie mentioned, we are one of the top ranked programs in supply chain management. We're very proud of the program. We graduate about 300 undergraduates a year and about 75 to 80 graduate students a year. And we had the career fair last week at Breslin Center. So the whole floor of Breslin Center and the mezzanine of Breslin Center had recruiters all the way around. There was about 250 recruiting companies from around the country, and even some from outside the country. And about 175 of those were recruiting supply chain majors. So huge number looking for supply chain talent from Michigan State, which is amazing, which is why our placement rate's so high. Now that's not all they were looking for, but one of the big draws at the Michigan State program, or to bring recruiters to Michigan State, is the supply chain program. But one young lady walked up to me and she was talking to Chrysler about a job, and she said, Dr. Close, I really like this program, but I really had a problem talking to my parents, because I talked to them, and my parents said, when I told my parents I was going to be a supply chain major, they said, are there any jobs in that area? I said, you can assure your parents you'll be fine. You'll do just fine. So I want to talk about what supply chain management is and how it's evolving today, and how it influenced the Great Lakes. So putting together a collection of slides, and I'll give my compliment to Peter Annister in the back, because I stole some of his working with MEDC, and we've worked tirelessly over the last 2 years trying to emphasize what supply chain is and what are the opportunities in the state. This is an example of the food supply chain, and we could all relate to this because virtually all of us eat, I believe. We're at the bottom there, and then the bottom right in terms of consumers. The top left is the farm. This is all the stages that products go through as we move from the farm to the cooperatives and animal production to processors, food companies, wholesalers, retailers, and ultimately to you. That is the supply chain. And as many of the speakers have talked about today, it is by definition international. It's global. We move stuff around the world to satisfy customers. Another way to look at this is a more pragmatic way. This is a Big Mac. And this illustrates the supply chain for a Big Mac. And this is bringing this, so when you walk into McDonald's and ask for a Big Mac, you're assuming that all these pieces come together. And if you want to look at it even more precisely, this is what we call the bill of materials for the Big Mac. So when you order that Big Mac, you're assuming that McDonald's has had delivered to it from places all around the world all these materials, and as Jim mentioned, safely, which is a critical part. Because any one piece of that was adulterated by terrorists or some other type of even accidental incident could make you sick. And obviously McDonald's doesn't want that, nobody wants that. So what supply chain managers do is manage that whole process. It involves transportation, it involves warehousing, it involves production, involves purchasing and inventory management. And that's all supply chain managers do, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's about 20 to 30% of the population that do this kind of stuff on a day-to-day basis. What we're concerned about is what role does Michigan play in that, and what can we do to help it out? So working with my colleagues at Michigan State and with colleagues in the state, we've tried to find out what changes can we make, and many of them have been talked about today here. What changes can we make that make the Midwest, the upper Midwest specifically, more supply chain friendly, if you will. And a great example that just occurred was Motorola. And Motorola just recently, within the last 4 or 5 months, opened a production facility in Fort Worth, Texas. And in that particular facility, they make these little devices here, smartphones. The newest version of the Motorola smartphone, the Moto X, is made in Fort Worth. It is the first smartphone in the world made in North America. They've always made them in Asia. And the reason they made them in Asia is what we always say, because of cost. It costs less there. And indeed it does. It costs less for production. In Asia, it costs $8 per phone. Excuse me, yeah, $8 per phone. In Fort Worth, it costs $12 per phone to manufacture. That's the labor rate. But when you look at all the other supply chain related aspects, when you look at the delivery time and the stuff that Jim talked about, particularly the risk and the sustainability, Fort Worth came out on top by a long way. So the point I'm trying to make is there are opportunities to redesign supply chains today that lower risk, improve service, and enhance sustainability. And that's the opportunity for the upper Midwest to find ways to do those three things: lower risk, enhance sustainability, and enhance responsiveness, which ultimately makes better business decisions and overall profits. So what we were emphasizing on for the upper Midwest and the state of Michigan is we need a supply chain strategy that's business focused, that's collaborative, and we've heard these themes today, and that leverages the key assets that we have or could have. And I'm going to talk about those, but also put it in the context of what some of the companies are dealing with today and how the supply chains are evolving. Supply chains at this particular point historically have been sort of, from many firms have looked at them as saying they're not really important. I mean, it's just sort of backroom operations, nobody really cares. Now companies are saying supply chain is our competitive advantage. One of those small companies out of Bentonville, Arkansas, you may know of them, Walmart. They are basically a supply chain company. That's how they make their money. And other companies are doing the same thing. There's another small company, which I'll bring up next, which is Amazon. Amazon is a supply chain company. All those are trying to deliver products to consumers in the way they want it, most effectively, and the various regions around the world, and certainly the upper Midwest in our case, that can play a critical part of that. Some of the changes in supply chain that we have to look at are technology changes. On the top left looks like a printer, it's a 3D printer. On the bottom right looks like a guitar. That was a guitar that was printed by a 3D printer. All right, so it's manufactured by a printer. Changing the whole technology. No longer do we have to have these big pieces of equipment that manipulate wood or manipulate steel, we can print these things out. So auto parts, a lot of equipment, we can make in a very different way. We look at another one in terms of a supply chain change. Some of you may have heard of Blockbuster Video. Well, if you went to Blockbuster Video, you used to get your CD or DVD, you'd go home and watch a movie. How do we do that today? Well, Blockbuster closed because none of us want to go there anymore. Netflix had a similar type model. In their case, you were getting it via mail, made it a little bit more convenient, but the success today is HBO. We're getting things over the internet that we never thought we could get before. Drastically changes the supply chain. One of the best stories I use to describe this to students is if you go on YouTube and look up wine and USB. Wine is in drinking and USB is in USB port. They have an interesting demonstration there where you can go on your computer, you buy this basically spigot, plug it into your USB port, and look on your screen to decide the kind of wine you want that night, and open your spigot up and pour it into a glass. The implication is that wine is coming down the internet. You will be amazed at the number of students who say, "Where can I get those?" You have to explain that the physics don't work today. It doesn't happen that way. A lot of stuff can come down the internet, but there are certain things that can't. We've all heard of this company. Amazon is dramatically changing supply chains. I don't know how many of you are a premium Amazon member. I am not. But you hear from a lot of people, I just order everything from Amazon. All right, how is that going to change the retail stores? How does that change the structure? Dramatically does. And companies, we're going out and with my colleagues at Michigan State, we're researching this now and trying to understand supply chains, and companies are saying, we're competing with Amazon and trying to figure out how to deal with it and how to deal with delivery. So that changes the supply chain. What we're getting is more customized supply chains than we've ever had in the past. Another company you might have heard of, Apple. What does Apple do? Well, their basic claim to fame is design and innovation. I mean, right now their products aren't unique. You can get it from many suppliers, but their opportunities and their infrastructure, not the infrastructure, but the ecosystem they operate with is what makes it really unique. You can get a little tiny iPhone or an iPad or a Mac, and they all look pretty much the same in terms of capabilities. And if you look at Apple's supply chain, Apple for the last 4 or 5 years has been the #1 supply chain company in the world. And what makes them unique is they deliver from the big box stores, the Best Buys. You can buy them at Apple stores, and you can buy stuff over the internet. They can do them all equally effectively. That's what makes them really good, and they're efficient. And the other thing they can do very well usually is innovate. And sometimes they struggle with getting the innovation out there. One of the most interesting one we saw, in terms of interviewing a company, we were interviewing with a company called Masco, which is a Michigan company. It's located in Taylor. And you may not know Masco. I'm sure you know some of their products, which is Merillat cabinets, Behr paint, and Delta faucets, and assorted other things. And they were telling us the story of how do people do kitchens today. And you know, when we've done a kitchen, you go to the designer or whoever, or maybe go to Home Depot and see what you need to design. Masco's 4th largest customer is Amazon. What they were saying is, you and I are ordering kitchens from Amazon. Think of the implication of that. That really changes the structure in terms of the supply chain. And why do they order it from Amazon? Because it's a whole lot easier than going in Home Depot or Lowe's and going from aisle to aisle finding all the pieces. You can order at Amazon as one integrated piece. So again, another example of how supply chains are changing. So the moment of truth is putting all the pieces together, and Amazon has figured out how to do that. And more customers and consumers are looking for organizations that put the pieces together, or as I call it, provide a solution, as opposed to provide a product. So we're seeing dramatic changes in the supply chain. We're seeing dramatic changes in the way customers, and particularly consumers, buy their products. What many of us, older generation, the way we buy things is radically different than the students buy things. And companies are trying to figure out ways how to deal with it. Many of the stuff is bought on the internet or some variation of that, and trying to deal with that in terms of the structure. So we have a business model really, the supply chain business model is really changing now. And in the sense of, we identify who the key customers are, who your biggest customers are, your main customers, and what kind of service do they want. Do they want it delivered to the house? Do they want it delivered to the office? In many cases, they want to do it both, or at different times, different ways. And then we also have what kind of value proposition. Are they looking for a supply chain that's cheap or inexpensive? Or are they looking for one that's responsive and quick? And again, in different cases, we may want both. And organizations that run supply chains that use modes of transportation like railroads or like trucks or air are figuring out what combinations they need to put into place. And then the last part to put the whole piece together is the capabilities. And the capabilities are what we've been talking about a lot today. Capabilities are partly infrastructure, they're partly organizational, and they're partly talent. And all those pieces have to really be put together. So the supply chain today is changing dramatically. As I said, it used to be the back room, nobody cares, just do your stuff and don't cost us any money. Now it is the way that firms are competing, getting access to customers. And we're in a stage where supply chains are changing dramatically for another reason. Firms are looking for more of a balance between scale and reliability. Historically, supply chains have said, how do we reduce cost? How do we do lowest cost of transportation or lowest cost of production? That is what drove a lot of companies over to Asia, saying we want low-cost production. Companies are finding out now that low-cost production doesn't necessarily mean lowest total cost. Infrastructure congestion is becoming increasingly problematic, particularly at borders, East Coast and West Coast borders. And while they're building them out where they can, it's still going to be a problem. And there are key interchange points that are also heavily congested. The one thing that's changing supply chains dramatically is increased energy cost. Most supply chains were designed when fuel cost somewhere between $1 and $2 a gallon. Fuel is 1/3 the cost of the supply chain, which means that at $4 a gallon, your supply chain costs have just about doubled. And people are looking for different ways to do it. And understanding the value proposition in terms of the supply chain changes. What do the consumers want in terms of the proposition? As I said, some consumers want quick delivery, some of it want inexpensive delivery, sometimes it changes, sometimes they want it installed, and there's all kinds of variations in that. You deal with appliances. I mean, most of us, when we buy an appliance, we may go to Best Buy and try that. We may order over the internet. In any case, we want it installed, we want the old one taken away. We want a solution. And designing a supply chain that does that. So if we look at the changing dynamics of supply chain, looking from the left-hand side, decentralized or a lot of plants or a lot of distribution centers, centralized few plants or few distribution centers. People have been driving their supply chains to reduce their cost per unit by centralizing. Economy of scale, make it bigger, and I get better cost per unit. And that's driven a lot of people to move products to Asia or move production processes to Asia. The trade-off with that is the more I centralize, I get higher transportation costs because transportation costs go up with distance. So there's sort of a trade-off there, as I illustrated with point A. And we've been talking today about the trade-offs between what happens when you increase the fuel prices. We get less centralization. And if you increase risk, you get even less centralization. What supply chain organizations are doing today, and what the theme of the conference has been, you've heard a number of people mention it, and certainly what we're trying to emphasize for the upper Midwest region is that if you want to lower risk, this is the place to be. This is the place to be if you want to lower risk. Now, at least one of the places to be. It's not the only one, but we think we're as good as any place else. So we emphasize lower cost in terms of we have a lot of resources available, some key resources in the case of water and space. If you want to reduce time, one of the aspects of supply chain is wait time. Time that stuff sits waiting somewhere. If we talk about in some of the key infrastructure sites, the East Coast, West Coast, product sits and waits. That raises inventory, it raises cost. And the ultimate one is reduce risk or remove risk. Take risk out of the supply chain. As Jim just mentioned, if you increase variability in the supply chain, if you increase variability in the supply chain by a half a day, just increase the variability by half a day, drives up inventory by 33%. Huge. So conversely, if you take out that half-day variation, you can save a lot of money by having less inventory in the pipeline. So what we're trying to do with MEDC is emphasize 4 competitive advantages to the region. Location, people have talked about this, percent of population within 5% of the population of North America within 500 miles. If you could read the percentages, it would tell you that Detroit has the highest percentage by significant, 41%. The next closest, I think, is Chicago, which is, next closest is Toronto at 37%. So, but we haven't emphasized this. I was just in Germany over the weekend, and I was looking at a presentation by a supply chain expert, and sure enough, middle of the presentation, what do they show? Detroit, the rundown Detroit, and all the bad stuff about what we know. The message is still out there. Somehow we got to overcome that part. We've made a lot of the changes, but we got to send a message. The Great Lakes mega region. If you look at the overall big picture on economic activity, you can see the Great Lakes and the upper Midwest is the point of most activity. Even though we call it a peninsula, which Michigan clearly is, but if you look at the connection to Canada, it becomes a critical trade route, as Michigan has always been. Industries. One of the key things we have to do is focus on the industries that we can really make a difference. The industries that will make a difference in terms of cost, risk, and time. And while this is not the only list, this gives you some industries that we could have some competitive advantage with. These are the ones that we've been good at. Some of them are more interesting than others. Some of them are growing dramatically. But we got to identify the opportunities that we can really make a difference with. We can't afford to spend money on industries that aren't going to make a difference. We can't emphasize in terms of supply chain. Infrastructure. We spent a lot of time today talking about key infrastructure items. We need multimodal, and that was clearly one of the emphasis, and we're also going to see that in the panel next. But surface, truck, and rail is a key combination, air and ship. And more companies are looking for intermodal combinations because, for example, trucks, which are heavily fuel intensive, or next to air, the most fuel intensive, when fuel costs double, they become not competitive. So we need to look at combinations where we can take advantage of rail and truck, and the same thing with air and ship, or air and truck combinations. There are many opportunities we can look at to combine those two. Key intermodal capabilities that we've talked about today are the international trade crossing, air freight capability, which a number of the airports around here are looking at. But again, we've got to get a world-class air freight capability. Intermodal rail interchange, clearly there's a couple opportunities for there. When we interview companies, shippers, which are the ones I generally deal with, one of their critical requirements is we need a big rail interchange yard in southeast Michigan. We need one, and let's put the resources to that. And some container emphasis for Great Lakes container ships or barges, particularly for agricultural. Last one is supply chain capability, and I pulled this quote out of Edward Wilson, Harvard professor of social biology. I think he's retired at this point. But he made an interesting comment. He said, "We're drowning in information while starving for wisdom." And that's really where supply chain fits in. The world henceforth will be run by synthesizers. I would like to say that supply chain people are basically synthesizers. We don't understand resources, we understand processes. We put together processes that deliver to get the right information in at the right time and make important choices wisely. There's other people that do that, I know, but that's what it takes in this kind of environment. One of the things we've done in terms of supply chain management is historically supply chain executives are siloed. They spend time in demand and supply planning and procurement, manufacturing, global logistics, and fulfillment. So they optimize like purchasing, or they optimize logistics. And the key today is you don't want to optimize any one of those. You got to have people that understand the bigger picture and understand the overall flow. Understand the flow from Asia to the US, understand the flow from India to the US, from Canada to the US, or whatever, and they can understand what the trade-offs are. And that's really what supply chain professionals are trained to do. So putting the pieces together, we've identified 5 objectives. And I just want to quickly go through these in terms of what's happening. Well, we need to do something with intermodal. That is a cry, Southeast Michigan, it's the same cry in West Michigan, and the same cry in Northern Michigan with the ag industry. Cross-border operations, a critical part. Supply chain organizations don't think of borders. Borders are immaterial. That flows, and any way you can minimize that inhibiting factor, we're going to be better off. Second one is collaboration. The governor signed the Commission for Logistics and Supply Chain Collaboration. I think it's a start to get an organization within the state government that understands the big picture. We're working with the West Michigan and the agricultural committees to look at understand the volumes of freight moving. One of the things to get a railroad to service here is say, where's the freight? How much could I possibly move? We got some regions of the state that are really stepping up and dealing with that. One of them is develop strategic marketing programs and campaigns. Pure Michigan Business Connect, and I'm not going to go on the websites, but and we have another supply chain success story from Fanuc Robotics. We got to get more stories that show what we can do. And those are a couple of examples, and Anne Marie is going to put this on the website so you can take a look at those. Prioritize infrastructure policy and figure out where we should put the resources. Certainly the bridge, air freight, intermodal rail are 3 that in our mind sort of come up to the top as being critical to make a difference. And the talent, as I said, we produce a lot of talent, #1 in supply chain for 3rd year in a row. The key part is to produce a T-shaped individual. And for those of you who don't know what a T-shaped individual is, that's somebody that is deep in functional knowledge, but more importantly, has an understanding of total business processes, the breadth of business processes. And the big data analytics capability. And the last one is interesting because it says skilled labor. And you said, we got skilled labor. No, we don't have skilled labor what we need. We need skilled labor that can understand computers. Even a forklift driver needs to know how to work with computers. And that's not something we've had in the past, and that's a critical part. If I talk to business owners around the state, they say, help me get people that can run computerized equipment is a critical requirement. So those are the objectives. I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 4 or 5 years. We have a list of objectives. We started to move forward on them, and I think we're starting to see the experience of companies saying, oh, this is not a bad supply chain environment at all. In fact, this is a great place to be. So thank you very much.